Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, "He should have just had the windows fixed, but now he's out thousands of dollars." My girlfriend and I moved into a house that had several broken, cracked windows held together with tape. The rest of the house was great and in perfect condition. The landlord promised to fix them ASAP. He kept promising to fix them month after month, with no action being taken. After 6 months I began recording his phone calls and had recorded him threatening to have us evicted if we got a lawyer, which is highly illegal in my state. Landlord cannot retaliate against a tenant for getting a lawyer. So, we got a lawyer and provided him with the recordings and pictures of the windows. We also contacted the City Code Enforcement Department and reported some minor code violations that we noticed throughout the house. At this time, I worked for a medium-sized payroll and corporate compliance company that happened to do the payroll for the company that my landlord was the president of. Because of this, I could see exactly which laws he was breaking due to state and federal human resource and labor law regulations. For example, he did not have a company handbook, labor board posters displayed, and didn't have various federal compliance reporting measures in place. Being in the industry, I knew the minimum fines for the slew of violations his company had would be about $730,000 due to the length of time they had been operating without these requirements in place for his business. So I reported his company to the appropriate regulatory committees, knowing perfectly well that when crap hit the fan, they would look to him for answers. I didn't hear anything regarding his company violations for some time while the legal negotiations continued between my lawyer and his. In the meantime, the code department issued a $10,000 fine for the code violations, including the windows, and required him to fix the windows. Now, anyone who knows windows knows you shouldn't replace one window at a time, especially when you have numerous bay windows in the house. This required him to replace windows in the entire house, which ended up costing $6,000 as there are lots of windows in the house. The legal negotiations ended after the windows were replaced. In my state, due to a clause listed in the lease, I was able to bill the landlord for my legal fees to fight him on this issue. Add $5,000. We are now at $21,000 USD in costs incurred by the landlord for these windows. A couple of months go by and I notice he's no longer on the company payroll. Again, I worked for the company that did his payroll and compliance for his company. When I called his company to verify we shouldn't be paying him, I was informed there were organizational changes due to fines brought against the company for a number of violations. When all was said and done, the landlord paid $21,000 out of pocket directly for the windows, and it cost him his job and his company at least $730,000 in federal and state violations. It didn't cost me $1 in the end. I couldn't have been happier with the outcome. The next one is titled, "Bully Me with a Custody Agreement?" You're getting sued multiple times. My ex-husband, Brian, is a toxic, controlling narcissist. Classic case. Our divorce was very bitter, but I tried to be fair, splitting custody and giving him decision-making authority under the assumption that he would be a better father than he was a husband. Things went well for about a year. I got a new boyfriend who was great to both me and my kids and wanted to be involved in their life. When he found out my new boyfriend, Tom, is going to be attending my kids' fall festival at school, he went off the deep end. He abruptly decided he wasn't going to watch the kids while I worked anymore. He also refused to let my friends or family watch the kids and said he had to meet them first. But then would refuse to do so and claimed he would sue me for going against the custody agreement, since he had decision-making authority. If I got a babysitter he didn't approve. I lost 2 days at work scrambling to find any place available, which was difficult because of the school's location they attend. He began asking the kids to call him every night, which is fine, but if we were eating or busy doing something and I told him it would have to be later when they call, he would rage and threaten to sue me. He began asking me at all times where I was with the kids. One day I went into work for 3 hours to clean up some things I missed due to a storm. I left the kids with Tom since waking them up at 4:30 a.m. seemed needless. When Brian found out, he raged and threatened to sue me. He threatened to apply for child support even though we split custody. He raged about every little thing. He didn't bring the kids to the Christmas school play because he knew Tom would be there. He fought me over medical appointments for the kids and refused to pay his share because he didn't agree to the appointment and of course, would sue me. He wouldn't let me have the kids during his time, even to let them attend birthday parties or sleepovers with friends or family. Something we had been doing for each other with no issue. This went on for about 2 months before I snapped. I hate when parents are willing to hurt their kids over their own egos. He kept threatening to take me to court and I was fed up with the empty threat. So first, I wanted to make sure he couldn't afford to fight me in court. Brian was on food stamps. I knew it was only because he was claiming to pay his ex-wife rent. She still owns half the house and he still owed her half the value. I sent his ex-wife a message asking her if she was getting rent from him and she said no. I sent that letter to Child Protective Services and they closed his food stamp card and sued him for fraud. Then his ex-wife turned around and sued him for her value of the house since he was claiming to have been paying her all along. Then I sued him to modify the custody agreement and take out all the things he was using to try and harass me. I had screenshots of every nasty thing he sent me. I had a letter typed by his lawyer stating he was looking for another job since I wasn't paying him and that's why he couldn't watch the kids. So if he tried to get child support I could prove he was capable of finding more income. I had medical records and receipts showing I had paid for everything for the last year for the kids' health needs. I had records of things he said to the kids about me. I had pictures of them looking filthy when picking them up from his house. I had receipts of everything I had spent on the kids for the past year. He folded pretty quickly, cannot harass me anymore, and is still paying off his first ex-wife. The next one is titled, "Careful What You Say, Words Can Come Back to Haunt You." 2 years ago, I met a guy, Hans, during a holiday in Europe. He's the prototype of the arrogant German, blonde hair, blue eyes, taller than me, I barely touch the 2 meters, and so on, but has struggled with being overweight for most of his life, imagine notorious big, and had little success with girls because of it. He's a fun guy, spirited, graduated as a chemist with the highest honors, etc. Ever since our meeting, we've been guy friends, shared stories, played games and kept contact, even though we were in completely different countries at the time. One of the stories he told me during our conversations is that he tried online dating. He met this one German girl, Helga, online, who, despite his physical appearance, seemed nice and genuine. She was blonde, perky, pretty and interested. He met up with her a couple of times, took her on dinner dates like a gent, the whole shebang. All seemed well until one day he wanted to kiss her and she recoiled. By his account, she was suddenly cold and mean to him, despite being friendly before. When he asked if she liked him, the verbatim online reply was, "Ugh, you're so ugly, how could I?" This crushed him and that was the end of his online dating days. We'd still hang out, but the experience put a big damper on him. That sentence came up in chats a lot. About 3 months ago, he moved back to Germany, having finished his chemist degree. Couple of other friends and I all came together to his town and went to a local bar. The first night we couldn't even spot him in the bar until he approached us. While not model fit, the guy lost a ton of weight and was sporting some serious musculature. He said he'd been working out during his time abroad because he was tired of being ridiculed. Q increased confidence, more girl attention, etc. Cheering, lots of beer and bad card games were had. A couple of nights later we go to the same bar. For some of us it's the last night in this quaint town, so we drink some more and, unsuccessfully, hit on many girls at the bar. Hans doing fine though, getting eyed up and even chatted up sometimes. At some point, he comes back to the table with shock on his face. It's her. After explaining to a few of us what he was talking about, we get the picture. There's a group of girls at the bar, and one of them is Helga. They've been checking Hans out tonight, and Helga doesn't seem to recognize him and was apparently even eyeing him up. We wouldn't be friends if we didn't start to poke him to pay her back for what she did to him. We were in a mean mood, and from what we heard, she was basically Satan. A good number of beers later we do a little recon and hush out the details. About 5 girls, all good-looking, have a direct view of our table and are obviously staring at the German giant sitting at it. Not that the rest of us were ugly, it's hard to compete with a mix of Dolph Lundgren and a Viking. Hans is now more pliable to our peer pressure, so we just push him to say exactly what he thinks to her. He liked the look of one of the other girls in the group, let's call her Anna, the most, so that's who he goes to chat up, 2 pulls of beer in hand and slightly tipsy. He's standing in the middle of the girl group, making jokes, being his usual self, and before long, has them in stitches. We're watching this happening from our table, just close enough to be able to overhear the gist of the conversation in what is now a late evening bar. Helga is obviously interested and is all over him, still having no idea who he is. Anna didn't stand much of a chance either, so he's the life of the party. Still seems uncomfortable every time he looks at Helga. When it's time to go, it's clear Anna and Helga are both pining for him and fighting for his attention. We're standing nearby, chatting with the rest of the hen club, but obviously paying attention to the transpiring events. Anna clearly holds Hans' favor, and Helga, after being ignored for too long, pouts and goes, "Hans, don't you like me?" The bar's quieter since it's almost closing time, so we all hear this. Hans stops talking to Anna, turns around to look at Helga and, slightly swaying, angrily responds, "No, and you don't like me." Both Helga and Anna are looking at him like, what the hell, until he catches his breath, calms down, and says the following in the most sneering, sarcastic tone I have ever heard from the guy: "I'm so ugly, how could you?" and breaks down. Anna, still not sure what's going on, grabs him by the arm and they walk out of the bar, followed by the rest of the girls and us. Helga is left standing there, eyes the size of teacups. I'm not sure if she remembered it at the time or was simply shocked by just being yelled at by a guy twice her size. Outside, Hans is crying manly tears, Anna is sitting on him trying to comfort him, and the rest of the girls are all around him, presumably providing moral support. He tells them why he said what he did, a short version, and all we hear is, "Oh you poor thing," in German. We're containing the "oh help" reaction, trying not to either laugh or cheer for Hans. Finally, Helga, recuperated from her shock, comes out of the bar, and is now faced with some absolutely disgusting stares from her own girlfriends, and a maniacally grinning group of guys, us. You can see the seething hate in how she could have turned down this hunk and hurt him so much. She tries to go to Hans to presumably apologize, but can't even get close to him as the girls protect him like he's their cub. She leaves, presumably crying or mad. Hans finally composes himself and says he wants to go home, but Anna is having none of it and basically drags him over to her place, supported by the other girls. We say our goodbyes and part ways, as do the girls, leaving Hans and Anna to themselves. I don't know what happened that night. I won't speculate. What I do know is that he still lives there, is working as a chemist for a large company, is happily dating Anna, and that Helga has been permanently removed from that girl club since that night. From what Hans told us, Anna chewed out Helga so badly that she had no friends left on the campus. The girls mentioned are all students there. Yesterday I received a call from Hans telling me he's planning to move in with Anna. According to him, he knows Anna is the girl because Helga somehow found his number and sent him a text to apologize for what she did. He showed Anna and she replied, "You're so ugly, how could he?" They never got an answer. The next one is titled, "I had a stalker for about 15 months. Here's how I fixed it. Couple of years ago, out of nowhere, I started getting these really shitty emails from someone who said they were going to crack me in the head with a hammer, break my fingers, etc. I pretty much blew them off because people can sometimes suck. Then other people began getting these same messages with my name as the sender and my email as the return address. The butthole was sending these through Russian servers and from behind a proxy, so they were virtually untraceable. Guy upped his game obviously. It was several times a week that I got messages from people, "Hey, I got this from your email address, googled you and decided that there's no way you could be sending this stuff." And then the guy started in on Craigslist in the local musicians section, posting pictures of me saying I was the baldest drummer in San Diego, what the hell, and calling me a pedophile, etc. Really libelous stuff. And about 10 times a day. It was relentless. At this point I talked to attorneys, police, even the FBI, and there was nothing that could be done, I was told. So Mr. Butthole got a little bit bold and revealed himself to my gear companies. I'm a professional drummer and have worked very hard to get affiliated with some of the best companies in the drumming world. In order to appear credible, he used his own name. Of course, they forwarded me his information. I asked the guy nicely why he was doing this, and he said, "You have flagging software that removes my ads from Craigslist and it's you who is doing it, so I am making you pay." Again, what the hell? This guy is a meth user obviously, crack baby. I dunno. I've never met the guy in my life. So I asked him nicely a few more times. Hell, I even went so far to build him a website, in essence paying him to go away, but still he continued this insanity. The way I got it all to stop was that I finally made an op-ed piece on him. See, with an opinion editorial you can pretty much trash someone 6 ways to Sunday as long as you present a positive side to the person you are drilling into the ground. So I did that and left it flapping on my website out in the wind. I even had a button, "Did you receive a threatening email from me?" that took the viewer to his page. I then sent him a nice email stating that, once this little tantrum of yours is over, this page shall remain as a blight on your character, because anyone who will seek to hire you will most certainly Google you and then you can explain this whole thing. Guess what he did then? He cried to my gear companies that I was attacking him. What a little witch. So I did end up taking down the page, but I still have it, and every time I get a bit miffed at something that reminds me of this, I think of reposting it on an anon blog and forgetting about it. Duck that guy. The last one is titled, "How My Uncle Got a Property Evaluator Fired." My Uncle Jack was involved in a rather unhappy marriage for the last decade, and about a year and a half ago he and his wife filed for a divorce. I don't live in the same state as my uncle, but from what I gathered from family members who live near Uncle Jack, the divorce process itself was a long and rather unpleasant process, one that finally ended about 2 months ago. There were a few reasons for this, but the main reason was a property dispute over some land that my uncle owned. My uncle isn't exactly a wealthy guy, and the most valuable thing he owns is a 5-square-acre plot of land that's been in my family's possession since the 1860s. I know this because my great-aunt was a historian and always brought it up at family reunions. The exact terms of the divorce were a little complex, and what they basically amounted to was that my uncle would have to pay the majority of all his physical property to his ex-wife. Most of their money went into the legal bills for the divorce, due to how long it dragged on for. As I mentioned, Uncle Jack was not a wealthy man, so this meant that his 5-square-acre plot of land made up the majority of his property. Now, this might not have been a problem if any of my family members actually knew the value of this land, but nobody had any idea what it was actually worth. There hadn't been a property evaluation in, well, forever, as near as anyone could tell. As a result, the proceedings couldn't continue until the property was evaluated. Enter dumbass property evaluator. Now, this guy had apparently been a professional appraiser for 25 years, and was licensed by the state. This is someone whom you would expect to take the case seriously, right? Haha, no. Now, in most divorce cases, land evaluation is typically done within a month. This particular evaluator took almost 7 months. Bear in mind that the case couldn't proceed until he finished his job. Through a combination of not returning calls, having other duties, taking time off, and other bullshit, it was almost 5 months before he actually started the evaluation process. Or supposedly started the process. Now, you may be wondering how the evaluator was allowed to get away with this sort of thing. Well, my uncle lives in central Wisconsin, right in the middle of Amish country. The closest town has less than 200 people and hasn't had any open businesses since 1990. Ergo, he lives right in the middle of nowhere. Additionally, this particular district was hit really hard by budget cuts that Governor Walker has pushed across. Most of my relatives in Wisconsin work for the state and hate his guts. Basically, most of the officials in the area didn't really care enough to do anything, and since the evaluator has been a licensed appraiser for several decades, they more or less allowed him to get away with anything. About 5 months into the so-called evaluation, Uncle Jack finally has enough of this guy screwing around. He tracks him down in person and spent a while badgering the evaluator to actually, do his job, and finally the guy agreed to get right on it. Before I continue, there's an important detail I should add. Uncle Jack works as a lab technician in one of Wisconsin's state labs, and he does a ridiculous amount of documentation. If he didn't, he would get fired on the spot, no questions asked. Now, since my uncle knows the value of having proper documentation, and has absolutely zero trust left in the evaluator, he began carefully recording evidence about the appraisal in case problems cropped up in court later. Here's another important detail I should add. My uncle's 5-square-acre plot of land is kind of a crap hole. It's very densely wooded, and there's a lot of marshes as well. The house itself is located right in the center of the property, and it's small enough so that it can't be seen from anywhere outside the boundary. Additionally, there's no access to any roads from the property. In order to leave his house, my uncle has to drive down a small, winding dirt path that exits through the rear of the property. Goes through a pasture owned by one of my other family members, who lives right next to Uncle Jack, turn onto another backcountry path leading through another neighbor's property, and then onto an actual road. Basically, it can't be accessed easily. Remember this. So, over the course of the next 2 months, the evaluator slowly, painfully, comes to my uncle's property to get the land appraised. Or at least he says he does. Uncle Jack doesn't believe him, especially since he hasn't actually seen the guy come over to his property, and asks his neighbors if they've ever seen the guy. They say no. So then he puts up a motion sensor device that'll trigger if anyone passes by, so he can tell if anyone enters or leaves his property. He then calls the evaluator, and eventually prods him into doing more evaluating. After waiting an entire day, the guy doesn't show up, and the motion sensor trap isn't triggered. 2 days later, Uncle Jack calls up the evaluator and asks him how much progress he's made. The evaluator then tells him that he came by and did some evaluating, and that he'll do more later. Now that he knows for a fact that the evaluator isn't doing his job, my uncle secretly begins to tape their conversations, both over the phone and in person. He also asks for documentation of appraisal progress, which the evaluator is oddly reluctant to give him. Over the next 2 months, Uncle Jack puts up signs along the roads leading up to the paths to the property, to see if the guy is even coming out to the county at all. Turns out he isn't. After further inquiries, he realizes that the evaluator doesn't even know that he lives on his property and manages to tape the guy lying to his face dozens of times about having come out to his property to do evaluations, even though he demonstrably hasn't. Uncle Jack quietly begins assembling a sizable amount of evidence that the guy isn't actually doing his job. 7 long months after the evaluation started, the evaluator finally wraps it up and says in court that Uncle Jack's property is worth more than $3 million. As I mentioned earlier, the land is kind of a crap hole, and it's immediately obvious to Uncle Jack that the guy pulled the figure out of his butt. Now, considering that this evaluation pushed Uncle Jack's net worth over $3 million, and the overvalued land itself only accounted for 4/5 of the property he owed, this essentially meant that he now owed $600,000 to his ex-wife. So, right after the evaluator gives the assessment, Uncle Jack stands up in court and loudly asserts that the evaluator never actually did his job, lied about it, and gave a fabricated assessment in court. He then presented the sizable amount of evidence he had to prove it, and asked the evaluator where all his documentation was. The evaluator, caught lying in court, was getting the evil eye from the judge, who also asked him if he had any documentation for his appraisals. According to my uncle, the evaluator turned completely red, and desperately tried to lie his way out of the hole he'd dug himself into. As it turned out, the evaluator hadn't done any documentation, or anything, for the evaluation whatsoever, and it was clear that he'd been lying his butt off the entire time. The judge blew a gasket, and ordered an investigation. Turns out the evaluator hadn't been doing any documentation at all for the past decade, and most of the appraisals he'd given over the previous few years had also been fabricated. The state was not amused in the slightest, and the guy was immediately fired and lost his license. I think he also had some rather serious lawsuits after that, but my uncle didn't know much more about what happened to the guy after that. Thanks for listening.